But the best way to learn is to do the work. Do the work on the real code base with real designers and real programmers and real pressures and see how things go here. I mean, what changes is expectations. So the expectations we have of you are very minimal to begin with, right? Like we want you on real work, but we're not judging you as if you've been here for 2 years. We understand you're brand new and you're going to stumble, but there's no better training than the real thing. So that's what we do.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Darin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Welcome to the Product Tea, the first episode without absolutely any rehearsed intros. And it's Jason Fried, and I finally gave in, and I said, okay, Jason, you can come again for a second time because you were so nice the first time. No, seriously, it is such a big pleasure to host you again, Jason, and to see you here also again in person. How have you been doing since the last time we spoke?
Pretty well, thank you. Yeah, no, I am excited to come back. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, I heard, your top 10 favorite podcasts of all time.
You're on the list. I'm not going to tell you, like, are you 3? Are you 7? You're in the top 10. Whenever someone says top 10, not in this case, but usually it means 9, because otherwise they would say top 5, top 3, right? But no, in this case, you're higher than 9. Definitely.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fair enough. So the cool thing with you is that, first of all, you have a name that people recognize, which is also very good. And you like writing. You also like to be unprepared for things, something that I also like to do. And I was stalking your blog and I saw that recently you wrote about motivation and anything that keeps you motivated. So like the fuel that keeps you going throughout the day. What prompted you to what motivated you to write about motivation lately?
Sort of a recognition that if I'm not motivated, it's just a massive drag to do. And it wasn't work related. It was something personally that I had to do, like paperwork. I had to deal with some stuff. And it's just like, it took me forever to just pick up that pen and fill out that form. I just did not want to deal with it. And then this is true at work too. I've run into situations where like there's an issue we have to deal with, or there's a hire we need to make, or there's a product decision we need to make. And I'm just like, some of those moments I don't care. I'm just like, I don't have it in me to care enough. And then I don't have the motivation, and then I just kind of keep putting it off. And it's what I've realized is like, that's just part of how I am and how I'm wired. And it's a good thing to be self-aware about and recognize that if I'm putting something off for a long time, it's probably because I'm not motivated to get it done. And then do we need to do it at all? That's kind of the next step is like, is this even worth doing? And if it hasn't been done yet, and we've thought we've had to do it, and yet it hasn't been done, we're okay. Do we still need to do it? So I've turned the malaise around essentially into a way to cut things out that aren't necessary.
So let's talk about something that requires an ongoing kind of motivation, like something that really can drain you. And in my opinion, that's always like recruiting for some position that is really, really hard to find someone. So I can talk about this also from my own experience. You start with a very high motivation. I cannot wait to find someone to kind of, fill this particular position. And then you go through person after person, or it's just like hard to find kind of profiles and so forth. And you start to lose motivation on the way. And it does not need to be in a professional field, but you get the point. Are you in the camp of, hey, let's pause and see and wait until we find the motivation again? Or are you trying to kind of power through it? Because personally, I start to make mistakes when I lose motivation because then I get sloppy.
That's what I was going to say. When it comes to hiring, it's really important not to just want to end the process. And I've been there in the past where we've just wanted to end a long process by just pick someone so we can get over with this, And then you end up making a mistake, like you said. And that's a big mistake to make. The people you hire are pretty much your most important decisions you're going to make in any business ever, essentially. And to sort of put yourself out of your own misery by just picking someone to end a process is a really bad idea. So in that case, I think what's important is especially when it comes to hiring, is to decide if we just don't find who we're looking for, we shouldn't hire somebody. Not like we have a position to fill, so let's just find the best of whoever. But if we don't find the right person, let's move on. Let's do the search again in 3 months or something like that. Unless it's absolutely positively critical, and it shouldn't be that you absolutely positively need someone tomorrow, it's best to wait and not make the wrong decision, because if you do, you're going to be hiring again anyway. And then you also got to let someone go if you have the power to do that, which is even more complicated and tricky and messes everything up also. So it's best to wait on certain things. Other things I do think you just want to power through if they're non-essential and you just got to get them out of the way. But then other things are like, if we haven't done it yet, and we've said we needed to do it for months, and we haven't done it, and things seem to be okay, maybe we just don't have to do it at all. That's another option.
Okay, so I'm going to find progressively an example that will make it harder for you to find now a good solution for this. So I had a very interesting talk with one of my PMs on this. And they said that, hey, I'm just not as disciplined as you, Leah, right? Like I cannot find the motivation to do so and so, right? So like for instance, like exercising for yourself or like whatever, right? So like what usually happens is something happens, we see a photograph of ourselves, we feel fat, and then we're like, okay, now I'm feeling motivated to exercise. And this is an interesting one because then you feel like, okay, you know what? Starting from next week, I'm going to exercise Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, while I'm sleeping, while I'm not sleeping, and so forth. And then the next week rolls around and it starts to feel like an unsurmountable kind of obstacle. So in this case, I cannot say that I should not do it because I really want to become fit. And I have my own method for this, but like this was a conversation that I had with someone else. And I would like to understand, how would you have approached this? Like, what is your angle there if you say that, well, it is worth doing? And so how do I form a habit? I think that's kind of like the question there.
Yeah. So my sense on these kinds of things is that this is where I think planning goes south. When you're like, I'm going to do this 5 days a week, every week for the next whatever, it becomes this massive mountain you have to climb. And that's demoralizing for some. For others, it's not. So if you're already not motivated and then you're setting up this impossible goal, you're not helping yourself. So I think it's really a one day at a time kind of situation. Like, look, okay, in fact, the best way to do that is not, if it's, let's say it's Thursday, it's not to say, all right, I'm going to start Monday. You have to start today. You got to start today because Monday isn't going to happen. Because you're putting it off today, you're putting it off Friday, you're putting it off Saturday, you're putting it off Sunday. Look at the momentum and putting things off. Like, what are you going to stop that on Monday because it happens to be Monday? Probably not. So I think in those situations, the best thing I found is to just grit through it today and not set yourself up to miss it again next week and set yourself up to climb this huge mountain, just one day at a time. And then, the thing is with like working out, for example, I don't know what working out means to you. It might mean lifting weights. It might mean riding the bike. It might be going for a jog. It might be jumping rope. It might be whatever it is, CrossFit, whatever it is. If you don't like to run, don't set yourself up to run. Like if you like to ride the bike, do that instead. Like don't pick hard things to do if you're not already going to do it. Pick something sort of easy, something you can do and gain some momentum. Otherwise, you're screwed. So I think in general, that's kind of how I would approach most things if possible. Some things are just one-off things. Like I got to get through this 9-page form because the accountant needs it. Like, okay, well, you got to get that done. You're probably going to procrastinate till the last possible minute. But if it needs to get done, legitimately needs to get done. Otherwise, you're going to go to jail. Okay, you got to do it.
Yeah, that's a good motivator.
Yeah, it really is. It's nice to have a huge consequence staring you down. The problem with working out, of course, is that there's no real short-term consequence for not doing it. It's all long-term stuff, right?
So that is exactly what it is. So I have
You could say, though, I mean, there are short-term things. Like you might feel better that night after you exercise during the day, but it's subtle.
Yeah, exactly. If it would be like an incredible rush, right? Like specifically, it's hard to be motivated for things that have a long-term kind of payoff, right? So like also the punishment from smoking a cigar is not immediate, right? But like you might get lung cancer at some point, but like not probably tomorrow.
Right.
So all of this kind of stuff works. So I was coming up with this kind of idea in my mind that I should definitely write a book about. So you can steal this idea if you think it's good. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's a really good one. So let me just lay this on you. So I'm always thinking in this regard like software, right? And in the sense of you have a scope, you have quality, and then you have some kind of a date, right? A time. So depending on what you feel is fixed is going to change the other things and makes them flexible, right? So like you have these 3 pillars. You have a date, you have a scope, and you have a quality. If you fix one of them, then the other ones need to give way. Something needs to give way. You cannot make everything fixed. So if the date is fixed, then the scope goes down. If the scope is fixed, then the date goes somewhere else, right? And so forth. So I think habits are formed in the same kind of way. But the 3 pillars are different. So one of them is the consistency, right? So like how regular do you do something? The second one is the quality. So like when you're doing it, how well do you do it? And the other thing is the quantity. So how much do you do it? I am someone that I learned this about myself because I'm very ADHD, right? Like it's very hard for me to kind of form habits. If I fix the consistency and I say like, I want to form a habit and I want to do this consistently, then I need to drastically reduce how much of it I'm doing consistently and how well I'm doing it. I'm just giving you an example. Because this is how I tricked myself into becoming really good with the bike. I started to establish a habit on my Peloton, which is something I could have never imagined. I had to start with getting on the bike 3 times a week for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And because I failed 10, 20 times whenever I tried to be there an hour. And that's kind of the thing. In my mind, I feel like only things are worth doing consistently if you're doing them consistently and you say, like, I'm compromising on everything else, no matter how ridiculous it is. Because that way I can actually keep my motivation up. I don't know. Like, I feel like this is a book in the writing.
No, I think that's a great approach, frankly. And I remember actually, I've gotten good. I go to the gym frequently. Now I enjoy it. For like years and years and years ago, I didn't enjoy it so much. And part of it was because I was setting myself up to do stuff I really didn't like riding the bike for 45 minutes, for example, is boring. I realized I need to move through space. And riding on a bike, an exercise bike like a Peloton, for me, is too fixed in place. And I get bored very easily if I'm not moving.
No.
So I realized that about myself. And had I just said, like, this is what you got to do, guys, to an exercise bike or do a treadmill or whatever, like, I would have been, and I was like totally unhappy with the process. And eventually it just kind of went away until I found CrossFit, which is a great fit for me. It's functional. I'm moving around a lot. There's nothing really, in place as much. There's some stuff that's in place, but a lot of it is actually physically moving around. And that really fits with my style. So you just got to find out what works for you. I'm certain there's you have now, but 5 minutes on the bike is a great start. 45 minutes is just intimidating and good chances you're going to fail. And then you're going to be frustrated and upset with yourself. And who wants to go through that? So yeah, make it easy to establish a habit.
The funny thing is when I do go on the bike, and I did this relatively fast, and I also stayed for an hour on the bike, it was just like, it sometimes feels for some people, specifically people like me, like things feel bigger than they actually are. It's more about the process of just getting started,
Yes.
And that's kind of fun.
That's true too. Which is why, again, I don't like to set up these big, huge things. Something's going to be this big, huge thing, because then it's quite intimidating. Just get started with something, like working on a new product right now. And maybe you're going to work on 2 more later this year. And I don't have them all dialed in. We just start with we start somewhere and we start getting going, versus like, we're going to have to do all of this in the next 6 months. It's like, wow, how are we going to pull that off? Versus we can start on Monday on this one screen. Like everyone's going to go, yeah, we can do that. And that's how you get rolling on things, is you just pick something small, you get moving, you iterate from there versus trying to dial the whole thing in up front. It's too big.
This is something that I really, really like this. The way that I usually frame this is that I have a particular challenge right now in my organization where it's about learning a new skill, right? Like something that they did not know before. Like, so for instance, hey, how do you learn how to deal with data? Right? So it's just like becoming data driven, or like someone that has never coded before. Even for those people, SQL is very, very scary and so forth.
Sure.
So they said, like, Leah, I would like to get better at data, but I don't know how. So how am I doing this, right? And I say, like, hey, I'm very glad that you're asking me, right? Like, here's some pointers, like here's some courses, here's like how you can do this and then. And then I started to notice that, this approach is actually wrong. What I should do, or like what you should do, is to put in a 1 hour blocker in your calendar where it's not about learning SQL. It's all this blocker says is, I'm going to get better at data. And that could mean that you talk to the other guy over there, that you are going to maybe learn SQL or whatever it is. And then he said, yeah, but I don't know what I'm going to do at this point, like next week when this calendar meeting comes around. And it's like, that's exactly the point. You don't know yet what's going to be going, but you will know that at the end of this hour, if you do really engage yourself with whatever that means, learning something where the data is, or like you find a course for yourself that you find interesting, you're still smarter at the end, even though you did not know where to go. You just said, I'm going to walk for an hour into some kind of direction, and then you're going to learn. And this is this kind of uncomfortable thing that a lot of people have kind of forgot. Like if I have a very big thing that I don't know. I know you don't have boards, but board meetings are a very good example of this. I don't know what I have to do to be prepared for a board meeting, but I do know that up there, I better prepare like 3 to 4 meetings with my CEO, even I do not know what the agenda is. But I know I'm going to need them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the thing, right? Like I know that I will have to spend time. So why not just go, just start, and in this particular time slot. And that's what I really like.
It's like people have different traveling styles. Some people want to go and plan out their whole vacation. I'm not that person. I'd rather like land somewhere. I know we have 6 days or something, but I don't want to, on Tuesday, we're going to this museum and then this place and that place. I don't want that. Like, I just want to go, start walking. Let's like, if we're in a city, let's walk the city. Let's see what's interesting. Let's just see where we end up, see what we find out, see what we discover along the way. Sometimes you've got to schedule a thing or two because you just have to get a ticket to something. Fine. Okay, fine. But like, I'd prefer to wander.
Don't do that in every country, though, huh? Like, I'm just
Sure,
saying, like,
sure.
I've been in some countries which I'm not going to name, otherwise I'm going to have some hate mail again. So, like,
Sure. Anyway, I mean, it's just different approaches. But yeah, I think basically what we're trying to say here is make something manageable for you. Some people need the big goals. Some people need the 1 hour on the bike right off the bat, some people need that. Know yourself, know what works for you, figure it out, and don't set your goals or approach or whatever for someone else's expectations. Like, figure out what's going to make you motivated and what's going to get you going, and go there.
yeah, that's fair. So I don't know how it is for you, but like, I'm sure you use also a calendar, or like, are you even like, are you such a hippie that you don't even have calendar appointments? I think you have, right? Like, I think you do, right?
Well, we have the Hey calendar, the new calendar we built. So I've been using calendars more, but we don't have shared calendars at work. So I can't see anyone else's schedule. No one can see mine.
Like, not even when you're busy and when you're free?
No, absolutely not. Totally against that. I think this is actually one of the biggest problems in business is that anybody else can see your schedule. I think it's a problem, huge problem.
Okay, cool. Now we can fight because I disagree.
So if someone wants to like talk to me at 3, they send me a note. Hey, are you free at 3? And I could say yes or no.
No. Okay, I'm interested. I'm very, very interested in this. So,
Okay.
like, let's say, I don't know, you must have some kind of recurring things anyways, like a bigger presentation or whatever, some bigger event is coming up, or like a launch or anything.
Well, like our podcast is on my calendar, so I have that coming up.
Yeah, sure. But like, I'm talking now internally. So let's say I would be one of your PMs or like one of your engineers or whatever, right? Like, and there's something that you expect from me to have by, I don't know, for a bigger planning meeting or whatever it is, right? So like some product launch, something fixed. And don't tell me you don't have fixed things at all, okay? Let's just assume even Jason Fried has something somewhere.
Okay.
What usually happens for people is that, so I'll give you a very specific example. On Friday, they have to present what they think are the biggest opportunities in their gardens. And I enjoy these meetings. I really, really do.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them are now realizing on Wednesday they need alignment with Leah. And Leah doesn't have time anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they're running against this kind of problem. Even if they ask me, like even if they would not see my calendar, hey, Leah, do you have time? I'm like, I don't have time for you. I don't. You should have asked me way, way before that, and then I would have made time for you. But right now, this week is not possible anymore. And on Friday, we have to present. So it's going to be a fun meeting. So how does this work? I want to know. You're such an outlaw sometimes. What are you doing, man?
It works just as you described, actually. You're like, someone wants to get on your schedule and they ask you and you're like, I don't have time. And they got to figure it out themselves. I mean, people will figure it out themselves.
Yeah, but I need them to align with each other. This is not like...
So have a conversation. Ask them. Ask it. Like, it should be hard. I believe this thoroughly. It should be hard to take someone else's time, to take someone else's attention. So if you have 3 or 4 people who need to get together, have a group chat for a minute. Hey, are you guys free 8? Free 9? No, how about 1? 1's great. Let's do 1. There you go. You don't need a calendar for that. Have a conversation. Make it an actual human conversation to see when you can all line up. Now, some people might go, that's so hard. It's not hard. It's actually not hard. What sucks is when everyone knows when everyone else is doing what they're doing, how much free time there is, because the free time basically says, here, take it. That's what free time says. There's an opening where I can take your time. That's what free time means.
That's not how it works at all. What kind of an anarchy club are you running, Jason?
Okay. If you ask people to share their schedules with you, there are blocks and blocks. It's like Tetris. It's like blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks. If everyone can see everyone else's calendar and they want to get on your calendar, what are they going to look for? A block time or free time? They're going to like, oh, Leah's at time between 3 and 4. I'm going to try to take that now.
Correct.
Because they can see it.
This is what I allow you to take.
Okay. I think you should be more protective of your time.
No. So I have a system, of course. I have a system. It's not a perfect system. So I find this very interesting. So, like the typical thing is exactly what you said, right? Like, so you have your calendar. What I think is absolutely shitty behavior. This is the thing that I always do the first time I go into a company, because most companies are run with actual calendars, I make my calendar public in a sense of not only do you see when I'm busy, but also what I do in there.
Mm-hmm.
You see everything, right? Like with whom do I meet and so forth. I like to be transparent in this way. And I have people who appreciate it.
You can be transparent in other ways.
No. Wait. Chill. Okay, we're getting there. So here's the thing. I am absolutely fine with also setting huge blockers where there's absolutely nothing in there other than just like a blocker. Like I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm going to need 4 hours of my night. No, I don't have to justify myself at all. I never had to justify myself. This does require exactly what you said, you being protective of your time. So you do start to set just blockers where it's just like, you can argue with me if you want to block in there and so forth. So I don't know. I see merit in your idea, but at a specific scale, this would not work anymore. But like, yeah.
Everyone always says it wouldn't work at some scale. Everyone's always curious about scale. I could give a shit about scale.
Why not?
Because it works great for us. It works great for me. So here's the default. You have to set up hacks all over your calendar to block off time from people taking it from you. You literally have to have a shield up. Doesn't that strike you as odd that you have to have a shield up? How about if no one can see your calendar? The shield is up automatically without a shield. No one can go, oh, wait, I can't take that. I can't take that. I can't take that. I can't take that. I can take that. Like, how about just, hey, do you have any time? When are you free?
But then you need to schedule again. It's like, yeah, there's like at 3 o'clock, maybe here,
Okay.
maybe there, maybe that.
Everyone does it differently. I'm just telling you that it's actually, in my experience, better not to see anyone else's calendar, not to see anyone else's schedule, and talk about time as if it's valuable. Everyone's like, time is money. Time is valuable. You know what? We will guard our bank accounts with 2-factor authentication, and no one can see your bank account statement, right? But you put your calendar up for everybody to see. So I feel like your time should be like your money in that sense. It's protected. You're not leaving a $100 bill out on your desk.
Hey. You are oversimplifying, my friend. But I like the anecdote. No, I like the metaphor. It's a clever one.
Yeah.
But you're oversimplifying that.
I don't think I am. But okay, fair enough.
I do think you're absolutely correct that we are too
giving.
Yeah, we're too generous about our time. However, I do say though one thing. There is a specific type of people that is quite hard to recognize also in a bigger corporation or like organization that would never take your time, even with a public calendar or whatever. They just do not take your time because they feel like they are not important enough. And this is now completely besides the point. It has nothing to do with the calendar. It's just like these people never ask you for a meeting. And I also had to teach to some people actually in my organization, hey, I'm here for everyone. And I don't care what kind of level you have personally, right? Like if you want to talk, the worst that I could say is that, no, I don't want to talk or whatever. But I feel like this is another side of the coin. But, under normal circumstances, yes, we should protect our time like $100 bills, Jason.
Yes. And by the way, I'll just end with this because it's fun to argue about this. But if someone's afraid to ask you for your time, they're going to be afraid to ask to send you a calendar invite too. I mean, like...
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
That's a social thing. It's not a technology thing. So, yeah. Anyway, I bet, here's an experiment that I think you could run if you're curious, and then I will let this go. Somehow, in your organization, turn calendars off for a week. Just turn them off. See what happens. I think what you'll find is people self-organize pretty damn well, and they start to talk to each other more, and they have conversations about time, and they value it differently, and actually will end up working out just fine. But maybe not. Maybe it'll be chaos. You'll have to tell me what happens.
So I find it interesting. You're not even close to convincing me, by the way, but like you're opening a door. No, you're opening a door. Like I always consider your point, right? Like I appreciate your points. I really, really, really do. This is why I like having these conversations.
My goal, by the way, is never to convince anybody of anything. I will lay out a point of view and like, it's up to you,
Yeah, whatever.
I'm not keeping score. Yeah.
I know. As you just said that, you just made a strike on your boom argument.
My hands are here. I'll keep them up.
So the thing is, I like to organize people around outcomes in the sense of you always have this kind of challenge. Okay, so what are we going to do in the next couple of months, right? So I think for you, the planning cycle is about 6 weeks. So, so what can you achieve in the next 6 weeks and so forth? So for me, it's roughly sometimes it's 12 months with 4-week kind of intervals in between where we just check on each other. Hey, how do you feel? Is it on track? Should we pivot and so forth? So whatever the time frame is, I usually go to my teams and say look, the only thing that I care about that you have to kind of get from me in terms of buy-in is this kind of, so I have kind of like a template, if you want to call it that, right? Like, so like some kind of form, like a slide on like, hey, try to formulate your idea in this kind of slide. Like in this slide, it says, here are the risks. Here's the rough validation that we think. Here's the problem that we think this is. And here are the customers that we think, like the size of the opportunity and why we believe this is true. This forces them to keep themselves short and so forth. And that's the only thing that I ask from them. I don't tell them whether they have to do it through Scrum, through Kanban. I don't care. I really do not care about processes. And it is interesting how people are confused. Like in the last 4 months that I've been now at Got Photo as well, I did not look into a single backlog of any team or how they run their stand-ups and so forth, unless someone really asked me like, hey, can you look at this ticket, like, and can we do something about it? What is your idea? Or, someone asking me for feedback and so forth. I think this obsession of control, and I think that's what you're getting at. You can definitely have control in, how do you say, like air quotes, whatever, like control over outcomes. And then the people can just like find their best way to kind of organize themselves in it. And those that struggle can also be helped. But I'm a really big fan of this. I don't understand all these bullshit frameworks, which is to get through to like, you need to like every 2 weeks, you need to have a retro that does this and that. And then we need to explain. I know you're also here. I know on this topic, you're more on my side.
We're together on this one. I mean, slightly different, but together in the big picture, which is a general outcome. In my opinion, it's not so much like a detailed outcome as it is a direction, and then set a time box of some sort and give people point in this direction and let them work it out. Let them figure it out with your assistance when they need to. But yeah, you draw some borders around an idea, and then it's up to them to figure out like what's, in our case, like what's the 6-week version of this idea? Like how do we get some version of this done in 6 weeks that we're happy with? And that involves trade-offs and cuts and scopes and trades and all the things. And then after that, we take a pause and move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. But yeah, by the way, in general, I'm not a fan of retrospectives at all. We can talk about that too.
I know you hate them.
Yeah, I probably made the point previously. So I don't like those either. And I think catching up like every 2 weeks, and it's too much in a sense. Also, it's too short. It's too much and too short. Mm. So anyway.
So how does this play out? So like, let's say you don't take it personal, but I think your approach to software development is not what people would call the standard Marty Kagan or like Scrum or whatever.
It's not.
Whatever framework you take, right? So like now people understood that I equated Scrum and Marty Kagan. That's not what I did at all. So people come with specific expectations. And let's say they start to work at 37 Signals. They're like, oh my God, I'm going to tattoo Jason's face on my left arm, on my right arm, David. I'm ready to go. Jason, we're going to go. So how does their first day look like? How do you onboard someone into this anarchic system of not having calendars? How do you define the expectations? So like, how do you set people on their path? I would be really interested to hear that.
Sure. Well, it depends on the role. But the thing in general, we get them into real work as soon as possible. So there is no, 45, 60-day gentle onboarding of here's the process and here's how we work and here's all the theory. The theory and the practice are the same thing.
No.
So we get you in on a project immediately, basically, as soon as possible. You got to get your computer set up, let's call it a week or two. You're in on a real thing. And you're typically going to be working with someone who's more senior, obviously, at that point. We don't throw you in on something by yourself. So you're kind of paired up with someone initially to kind of get the lay of the land and feel things out and to see how things work and to ask questions as you go. But the best way to learn is to do the work. Do the work on the real code base with real designers and real programmers and real pressures and see how things go here. I mean, what changes is expectations. So the expectations we have of you are very minimal to begin with, right? Like we want you on real work, but we're not judging you as if you've been here for 2 years. We understand you're brand new and you're going to stumble, but there's no better training than the real thing. So that's what we do. And if it's customer service, typically someone will be looking over your tickets. You'll write the tickets yourself and someone will look them over perhaps before they're sent, or every handful of them will look them over, things like that. So you'll be working closely with someone, but you'll be answering real customers, not like fake customer things, but real customers have real questions. You'll be answering those. Maybe you'll start with just one product in one particular area. Maybe everyone will just send you all the questions people have about Basecamp's card table, which is our Kanban feature. Maybe that's just like what you're focusing on. So you can get really good at that initially. But again, someone will be looking that over. If it's programming, you're working on real code. If it's design, you're making something real. That's essentially how it goes.
What about how do you ensure that people get access to the knowledge that you and others have in the organization about the market and also your customers itself? Like more like the general kind of knowledge, like, hey, this is how our typical knowledge, right? So, like, hey, this is how the market looks and so forth. How do you ensure there's some kind of basis there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes naturally over time. So it's not about front loading somebody with everything they're ever going to need.
Hmm.
That's overwhelming, just like jumping on the bike and riding for an hour is overwhelming the first time. So it's like you'll figure this stuff out as we go. And whatever project you're on, that's all you need to know about. You don't need to know about the whole company and everything we're doing. And like you're building this, I don't know, habits feature in the Hey calendar, right? We
Mm.
have this feature in the Hey calendar where you can set up your habits. Speaking of habits, you just need to understand that. That's all you need to understand. And then the next project you do, you'll understand another part of the product and maybe other demands and other use cases and other people who use it differently. And so you begin to amass your knowledge, just like we do in life. You don't learn everything in first grade. You learn what you need to know in first grade. Then second grade, you learn some more. In third grade, you learn some more.
No.
That's kind of how it works, essentially. Now, the most important thing that we've instituted is that we have this 1 year point in time
Mm.
where it's basically hell yeah or no, essentially. This is Derek Siever's book. I don't know if you ever read it, called Hell Yeah or No. Or I don't know if that's the whole book or an essay, but essentially the way we think about it is this. At the 1 year point, we have to basically hire you again.
Mm.
This is how we think about it internally, which is like knowing everything we know now about what you've done, how you've done it, what you're doing, how you're growing, your trajectory. Would we hire you again right now? And basically the answer has to be yes. Otherwise, like the experiment basically is up. So people kind of have a year to find their footing and get to a place, not where they're going to know everything and be expert and move levels and all that stuff, but just like, okay, this person's definitely on track. Like we want to work with this person again. Like we would hire them again right now. Absolutely. It'd be a huge loss if we lost them. Some people make that bar. Some people don't. Most people do because we tend to hire pretty well, but not everyone does. And that's the 1 year point. So you need about a year to get everything under control, essentially, which is enough time to figure it out.
I think I like your long-term perspective there, and also, so like, just one suggestion on something that you can just change now in your product. I don't know whether you do it, but instead of calling it a habit tracker, you should call it a habit tracker.
Habit, nice.
Habit. Oh my God, habit. You've heard it here first.
It's a good pun.
For those that are using Hey, this is a habit. Exactly. So, a habits tracker. So, at the core of it, I really like what you're doing, because also, like, in these classical dinosaur organizations that I work in, right? So, like, classical tech that are light years behind of what Jason is doing. Unironically now, I think it is very clever to have people work for a very specific amount of time before you give them actual market knowledge and so forth. Because I feel like, first of all, you're anchoring people with assumptions. And it's not always wrong. It's just, if you tell me about, like, because some products are also much more complicated, because of compliance and legal requirements and all of this kind of stuff. But when you give specific information to people, it really matters when you give it to them in how it influences them. Because if I have exactly what you said, right? Like, so if I did work with customer success issues, and I have in my mind like 5 issues from really big clients, and now I'm going to get the onboarding talk after like 3 to 4 months, like, hey, like, these are the typical kind of markets that we go in for the bigger clients. I now have a connection. I know their faces, like, I know how they feel, and I know what kind of problems they have in our product. And I feel like this is a very clever way of, like, do onboarding not at the start, actually. Do it a little bit later and give people time. So
It's kind of like how education works. Like you don't teach someone calculus until they know algebra. Not quite the same thing, but it is in a sense the same thing. You don't dump everything on somebody early. And I know there's some organizations that have like this more university style, like we're going to study up and teach you everything you need to know about this place. I think that you learn by doing. And I think that you learn through exposure. And then the stuff that you don't know, you either get filled in the gaps are filled in like formally, or you don't need to know everything either. I don't think it's important for every employee to understand everything that I know about the business, just like I don't know everything they know about what they're doing. We don't all need to know the same things. We need to know what we all need to know. And these are people in different roles. There's some commonalities and some like shared things we should understand. Like if we make software for small businesses, you shouldn't have in your mind how should this screen look if you have 9,000 employees? Like we don't make things for companies that have 9,000 employees. We make trade-offs there and we have different design decisions. So you need to understand some of the basics. But in that case, like the numbers more valuable, in my opinion, than like, what kind of person is this? It's more like this screen should sort of look good for 50 to 60 employees. That's basically where our sweet spot is. And if people have 3,000, like it'll work. It's not ideal. It's not optimized for that. We're not going to put the extra time in to make that work for them. I'm not interested actually in those customers, even though some of them might choose our product.
I think this is why also your approach is working for you. Like, I'm not being now clever about it. I really mean that. I also do think that a lot of your ideas would not work at a bigger scale. And this is also, I know this is a conscious decision from you also to not grow the company beyond the specific point. And I like this, right? So like, there's a reason why you're not scaling to become like a 2,000 people company and so forth, because a lot of these concepts would not work anymore. But I also, is it correct that you are at the scale of a company that you keep where also your ICPs are, like this is also like, it's ideal to also use your product in the way that your ideal customers also would use them.
Essentially, yeah. We're fewer than 100 employees. Most of our customers have fewer than 100 employees. Many of them have fewer than 50. We build things for companies like us. And you know what? It's the biggest market in the world. So everyone likes to think the Fortune 500 and the big enterprises. No. There's hardly any of those compared to businesses with fewer than 50 people. Business with fewer than 20 people, there's even more of those. So we swim in very fertile waters, essentially. But yeah, we've kept the company small, not just to match our customers, essentially, but because that's the kind of company we think is the right size for the kind of work we want to do. We have over 100,000 paying customers. We have a big, huge customer base. We have serious revenues and tens of millions of dollars in revenues and profits and all these things like. But we have, 70, I think we have 73 people or something right now. Like,
Yeah.
You can do this. It's not that if you gave me 25 more people, we wouldn't know what to do with them. Like, we're optimized in a way where we can make a lot of progress with very, very small teams. And we don't want to do too many things at once because then you start to lose quality and lose control to some degree. Now you can hire more managers and more people and more eyes to keep on things, but then you need to communicate more with more people and more eyes and more ears. And then that becomes complicated. And then you slow down. And like, I think we're kind of just settled into the right size for what we want to do.
Yeah, and I think this is at the core of it, right? Like you have naturally found this kind of level where you don't need middle managers or like none of these bullshit managers that are unfortunately required, because one of my hobbies in a Sunday afternoon is scaling companies, right? So it's like, for some reason, I kind of enjoy. My wet dream is always like scaling companies from like 20 to 150 if they let me, right? Like this is kind of like the thing that I really enjoy. And there are a lot of interesting kind of stages in between. And exactly what you just described, like the 70, 80 people kind of border is where it starts to become sticky and some really weird things are starting to happen. So for instance, you start to not know everyone anymore. You cannot remember everyone anymore, right? Like you don't know maybe the person that was hiring someone else anymore, right? And you need a middle manager and there's just, you need calendars, right? So like, no, but like I honestly mean it. Like at the scale of where you are, it's also great to know that, you can find systems that are stable at exactly this scale and nowhere else. And I think I agree with you. I think more companies should do this. And also to your point, I think we had this interesting kind of number that you can achieve due to AI and all the advances that we have in tech and so forth in a couple of years with 75 people what used to be achievable by 125. So the same goes now for you, right? Like we start to have much more hyper productive, smaller companies. And to be frank, it's also much more fun at this scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's less ego around.
For sure. And as far as scale goes, to me, like scale in many cases is actually a bug. Not in all cases, but I can tell you that in the markets that we're in and the companies that we compete against, many of them have hundreds, in some cases, thousands of employees. We have roughly the same number of customers. Revenues might be different because they might charge a lot more for their products than we do. But what you charge for your product has nothing to do with how many customers you serve. We're serving roughly the same number of customers. And I look at them and I go, what are you doing with these 785 people? Like, I don't even understand. How is that even possible? Now, some teams have salespeople and have people we don't have and whatnot, but other teams have like 19 people working on a feature, or they've got a whole mobile app team of 45 people. Like that's more than our entire engineering staff that does all of our web, all of our mobile, all Android, iOS, all the like. what are you doing with these huge teams? And a lot of it is when you get to your point, you get to a certain scale, you need to add another level of managers. Then you need to add another level of compliance. Then you need to add more HR people. And before you know it, it grows in a way that it doesn't actually serve the product anymore or even the customers anymore. It has to serve its own size, and it has to put on more support to hold this thing from collapsing, because that's what happens with large groups of people. Like, you need more structure. So anyway, we can go in circles on that. But yeah, we found our place, and our place adjusts. We used to be 20. We got as high as, I think, 83. Now we're at 75 or so. So it's like, you just kind of find your place.
That's so quite interesting. I actually have some numbers in my head on how I think well-run organizations can actually think about this. And let's say you have a 50 people organization that runs really well. I also like at your size that you said, so I have 50 people. So if someone asks you, so let's say I want to double the effect, whatever that means, double the innovation, double like the value that you create for your customers. And let's say that would also be possible. You don't have to hire another 50 people to double the effect, because exactly of what you said, you have overheads, you also need managers and so forth. So in my head, it's always at least 3 times if you do a good job. That means to have double the effect of a 50 people organization that is managed well, you need to have 150 people, right? So like this is going to triple your personnel cost. But now it gets even worse. Like, let's say you now take this well-organized 150 people business, which is possible. It is possible. Now you want to double this again. You need to triple it again. So now you're at 500 people. And now we're at 500 people versus 50 for an organization that is 4 times more effective. And this is this crazy overhead. And this is also one of the reasons why my personal border for scale is at around 200. Because this is it's roughly like Dunbar's number, like where people just like, you have to separate, and all this kinds of garbage and so forth. But it is an interesting concept and discussion. I think it takes a lot of skill to scale something without making everyone miserable. But it is possible. I did see it happen and work also at bigger scales, but not like 1,000 people. I also don't feel comfortable in these sizes.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can. Like, there, of course, are large companies that do amazing things. Of course, it's possible. It just depends on how you want to expend your energy and what you're also doing. And so anyway, every organization has to find its own way. Like, we are all stumbling in the dark, truly. And every organization is made of different people with different motivations and different personalities and perspectives and all the things. And like, you just got to find your own way. There's no perfect size for anything or anybody. It's just you find sort of the right-ish size for what you want to do, and you go from there. And then you let the chips fall where they may, and the market tells you the truth. And market doesn't care if you have 1,800 people or 1,200 people. They care about, like, is the product any good? Is it fairly priced? How's your customer service? Does it address the things that you need? Does it help people with their struggles? They don't give a shit about your employee count. No one cares about that. No one cares about how much structure you need or any of the things. Like, but does all that service what really matters in the end is like, what does the market think of your product? And what do you think about it too? I mean, like, it's important, of course, you've got to be happy with what you're doing. Like, I'm sure I could sell more product if I built a bunch of stuff I didn't like and didn't want, just because I could find more people who would want to buy it. But that would make me unhappy. I'm not going to do that. I'm not willing to do that.
So here's an interesting one, right? Like, so unlike you, I had more jobs. Because you just stayed like for 25 years in the same gig, which is admirable.
Maybe.
So when I look at these positions and what I thought is important to me, what motivates me, what makes me happy. And I think we can agree, like, you were fortunate. You also had always a very strong opinion, and you always stayed your course. And we can also talk about moments where you actually got weak a little bit. So, because you also had those. Sure. But for me, there was an interesting part in my career. And I would say over the last 15 positions or whatever I had, fixed positions, or 10, I don't remember, there was one where I thought on paper, oh my God, that is it. That is it. This is the problem that I'm falling in love with. It was something that had to deal with psychology, like buyer intent and so forth, so it was about, it doesn't matter. I don't want to get too much into it, but like, I was in love with the problem. To this day, I think it's one of the most amazing things. And my boss was amazing. Everyone was really nice, but I was incredibly lonely. And it was because back then, this was one of those very few jobs that was actually completely remote. But so completely remote in a sense that I had to drive to an office for an hour, sitting alone in that office, and mostly no one was around. And then I was talking to my developers and so forth. And then in the evening, I drove home. And I got extremely lonely. Like there was just no social interaction happening at all for me as well. Right. It's like it was not like hybrid today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I always felt like, don't you have to fall in love with the problem that you're dealing with? And while that is true, there's so many other factors as well. And I started to learn that I can actually get excited about the most mundane crap as long as it's a really tough challenge. And I'm like, I can do this. I
Okay.
can figure this out. This cannot be this shit with me on the helm of it. And especially if people tell me, like, yeah, but this is how we're supposed to be doing it. This is how everyone in the industry is doing it. And I'm just like, no, we can do this different. And then I'm in it, right? Like, this is kind of motivating me. But this has very little to do with what kind of product it is, like whether it's project management, product management, psychology, this stuff, that stuff. I don't know whether you have some flavor on this one, but like this has been a huge learning for me.
Well, I think it's important that everybody figures that out for themselves, and you clearly figured that out. For me, I've realized I need to work on something that I'm going to use also. So it needs to be something that I want for myself too. But there's many things that could be that too. What I really get excited about is what I would like to call a clever solution. I like to find the thing that simplifies something to a degree where it's like, oh my God, of course. Like, why hasn't anyone done that before? Or why was it so hard before? Now it's so much easier now. Like that's the kind of solution that I enjoy cracking. To me, it's a mystery. It's sort of a fun thing to figure out.
Yeah.
And we're likely going to begin working on a bug tracker.
Mm-hmm.
Now we use Basecamp to track all of our bugs. And bug tracking was not actually that interesting to me as a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But just this last week, we happened to have our company meetup. We were all together and the designers were sitting around. We were just shooting the shit. And we were playing with this idea. And then someone, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but someone suggested something totally ridiculous. Mm-hmm. On paper, ridiculous, about like a way to display bugs. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a fucking great idea. That's so unusual and weird, but also I love it. And at that moment, I'm like, we're doing that product. Because that solution is so, like the idea is so unusual and different and novel, but also full of utility and interesting that I'm like, this needs to exist. And no one else is going to do this but us. I'm positive of that because it's so weird.
Without talking about what the visualization is, but like what does it give you as a, I don't know, like as an executive or whatever, like if you look at it, like does it give you to convey that the scale of the problem, or like what does it give you?
You're trying to get it out of me. You're trying to get it out of me.
No, I'm not. No. I'm just trying to understand the emotion.
It's a visualization. Yeah, it's a visualization that gives you a feeling of, I'm trying to really be broad here. It gives you a sense of quantity, but also a desire to do something about it.
Okay, cool.
And it's unusual. And it started out as a joke. And I love ideas that start that way because it's kind of like in someone's head, like, what's the silliest? Like, that would be ridiculous. Actually, no, wait, maybe not actually. Maybe that's actually a great idea. And so at that moment, like, we're doing that. We're doing that product. Absolutely, we're doing that product because not only is it interesting, but it radically, in my opinion, it provides leverage to radically simplify tracking bugs. And I know, by the way, in this category, most people I've talked to in the past 20 years absolutely kind of despise and hate what they're using to track bugs.
Yeah, the tire fire of Jira, we can name brands. It's not a problem.
Fine, there you go. Like, I have not met a single person ever who's like, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I know.
And by the way, I've never used it personally. I've seen it, but I've talked to people about it. And this isn't like to take them down because that's not what this is going to do anyway. I'm never about like beating anybody. I'm just like, okay, we can make a more pleasant. This is like the same reason Rails exists. Rails exists and Ruby exists to optimize programmer happiness. And I think that we can do something similar here in this area. Everyone's got bugs in their product. Like, this is not a problem that's going away. There's software that has issues and people have to deal with those issues. And can we do that in a pleasant way? Is it possible to have a pleasant, interesting way to look at these things versus like the mind-numbing world that is Jira and other tools? So anyway, long story short, I'm giving it away here first. We're going to make something.
I will feature it for free in a sponsoring on the podcast.
I need to make it first. So right now it's just an idea, but it's going to happen.
You have 2 weeks. All right. So I think, so here's a funny one. As you were saying this, like I recognize that you, the anarchist, and me, the scalarchist.
Scalarchist.
I was like, no. So I always have these discussions about outcomes and so forth, right? So like, hey, how do we evaluate like the health of a code base and so forth? And, like I'm a big believer in, like making things visible and making them measurable and so forth. So people are always like, so how do you measure like the health of a code base? Because people are always resorting into, here's how many story points we can get done. And like, if we're fixing, and I find this entire story points theater absolutely disgusting. I think we already talked about this in our last episode. However, so I feel validated now after talking to you that I sometimes just ask the developers, how scared are you to push the button when you release something? And that tells me how our release infrastructure is feeling. And then people say like, yeah, but that's like, isn't this very subjective? And I'm like, yeah, it is subjective, but like this is answered by people that you have hopefully hired that know what they are doing. If the fire department tells you that something is not safe for fire, then it's probably not safe for fire. Doesn't mean that you have to do something about it. And you still need to kind of figure out like where your threshold is. But this is far more accurate than anything else in regards to, like your infrastructure is not going to magically overnight going to turn into something safe and someone is going to like measure it or rate it different. So I go by opinions with people in the absence of other measurements. I definitely do. It's hard to kind of match it against revenue. But did you ever try to kind of measure story points against revenue? That shit does not work. Definitely doesn't work.
I don't even, honestly, I've heard of story points. I know it's the agile thing where we don't do anything like that. Never have, never will. I don't believe in that kind of working. How do we know code base is good? Because we like working in it. We like being in it. How do you know a garden is good?
Yeah.
Do you count the flowers? Do you measure no, do you go, I like being here. And so you want to be in a place that feels good. Like your code should feel, it's like you pick up a book and you read this beautiful prose and you go, I like reading this book. This book feels good to read. And there's other books that are really hard and you struggle through them and you're like, I don't like being in these pages.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. David talks a lot more about this than I do because this is really David's forte. But he wants code to be beautiful because there's an aesthetic to it as well. There's an aesthetic to things that feel right. And no one should be afraid to jump into anything here. You should be like excited to jump into something. Now, we have had products in the past where we were sloppy or we handed them off to another team and they were sloppy, another team like outside the company and then bring it. And there's still areas of the code base that we say like, it's smelly code. Like we don't want to go near that code. And everybody knows that code and they know that part of the product and they know that product itself and they want to stay away from it. That's the signal.
Yeah, that's fair. I was laughing in my head when you said the flower thing. It's like, yo, I'm depressed, Leah. And okay, good. So you need to go into a flower garden to treat your depression. How big does the flower garden have to be? 200 flowers? No, wait, you know what? Let's make 400. Let's make sure you're going to be happy.
Right.
That's kind of like what it is.
Yeah. So I think because it's like, we're talking about computers and math. It's like everyone thinks everything needs to be measured to be either managed or I know that's like, what you can't measure what you don't manage or whatever the hell, manage what you don't measure, whatever that saying is. I don't believe that.
What's measured is getting managed. Yeah.
There you go. I mean, there's some truth to that to some degree, but I don't think that's a requirement whatsoever. I think you can get a feel for things too.
So respectfully, kind of disagree but I think you will agree with it if you look at it from the perspective of like where visibility is, things will get managed. But there's also a danger to this, right? So I'll give you a very classical example that I usually have when we talk about sales-led organizations. I don't think you have sales, right?
We don't have salespeople, no.
Okay, but salespeople are a really good example of this. So salespeople are really, really good in putting a lot of visibility on your inbound funnel, right? So like how many leads do we get in? How do we push them forward? How can we annoy them in the most efficient way to kind of like,
right.
to kind of like piss everyone off? So this is a dangerous visibility. Why is this visibility dangerous? Because there's not equal visibility in the rest of the product, in the engineering code base and all these other kind of things. And that's what this means, like what's getting measured is getting also managed. And that is a dangerous thing. So I kind of take this as a management kind of lesson in the sense that if you start to measure things or you start to look at them, please know beforehand whether you want to do something about it. And if you do not like it, then don't measure it at all, right? Like, then don't look at it at all. Like, if you are not ready to expose your product, for instance, into the wild, and then you don't listen to what customers tell you, which is also visibility, don't do it in the first place. That's kind of like the thing. You cannot say A without saying B, and so forth, and going forward.
No, I think that those are really valid points and important. Agreed.
Yeah, I think we solved it.
Yeah, I mean, from both sides, because to the measurement side, I think you kind of handle that. And my general point of view, again, is people are pretty good at figuring out if they like something, if something's good or not. Like, you walk into a building and you have a good sense of, like, I don't need to measure the building to know if, how it feels to me, or if it's a good building, or, I mean, you can feel. The same thing is true with the garden. The same thing is true with a walk. Same thing is true with a run. Same thing is true with a lot of things. Food. Like, you make a great dish. Like, okay, so that was like, God damn it, that was good chicken or whatever. Like, well, how do you know it was good? How do you know you need to change it next time? How do you know, okay, maybe it wasn't so good. Well, how do you know you need to, well.
No, I know.
Go ahead.
I got the answer, teacher. Okay, so here's how it is. So I am with you. I cannot measure the objective tastiness of a chicken itself. And I think what people would love to have is like this one question, or like this one measurement that kind of tells you how good it is. And we are calling this the NPS. So the NPS is the biggest bullshit metric in the entire industry, in my opinion, because you're like, hey, Jason, how likely would you recommend this chicken to David, right? And you're like, yeah, a 6, 7, 8. This is total bullshit. However, you should measure always. If you want to measure customer happiness, what you measure is not whether you are in the building, but like, how often are you in the building? Because people usually tend to come back into things that they like, right?
Sure.
So like, if you come to the same restaurant over and over and over again, it might be because of the chicken. It might be because of the, ambiente, or like, it might be because of the people that are sitting in there and so forth. So if you want to measure happiness, then try to tie it with something that gives me a very clear signal. Hey, they actually like this thing. And that's usually product usage most of the time, not always, but most of the time. Good products are being used a lot by people who love them. That's just that simple.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think there's just a lot more that's purely observational and paying attention versus like literally looking at numbers and trying to measure things. Again, like, I can't measure the tastiness of the chicken. It's like, it needs more salt. Okay, I'll put some more salt on it and taste it again. It's like, how much salt did I put on it? 1/18 of a teaspoon, or like I don't know.
That's baking. That's not cooking.
That is very precise.
No, that's what I've been told. So I'm a pretty good
baking
cook.
is science for sure. But anyway, I'm sort of going all over the place here. But I think in general, to me, software is more like gardening.
Yeah.
It's more like writing poetry. You don't measure a poem. You get a feeling from it. You don't measure a garden. You get a feeling from it. And I think that no one would go, that's ridiculous. They go, yeah, I kind of get that. So why do we think that can't be true about a code base or a product? Now we're like, well, because people pay you and there's numbers and there's, all that's true too. But I'm more on the side of the amorphous feeling of things than I am on the scientific precision of measuring something that in the end, you still have to interpret what the measurement means. I don't like looking at a number to decide if something is good or bad. I like to think it through and feel it. So anyway, that's just me.
Well, when your bug visualization comes out, I will give you a feeling.
Thank you.
But I'll promise, if it's above a 5.
A feeling of 5.
If it's positive, if it's better than 50 flowers, I will make a free promotion on my podcast on it. Promise.
Thank you.
And this was a great hour. Thank you so much, Jason. I want to also be mindful of your time. How can people reach you? Should they reach you? How can they establish habits with you?
Habits. Nice. I'm on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, Jason Fried, or @Jason Fried. The newsletter, it's at world.hey.com/Jason. And I'm on LinkedIn, and you can email me too. My email address is public. It's in a variety of different places. And just don't come up to me at conferences.
Yeah, to me neither.
Like our initial off-camera discussion, that's a bit of an inside baseball thing there. But anyway.
This is good.
No, you certainly can. If I happen to be somewhere, say hello. But yeah.
It's okay. It's fine. Thank you so much for this hour. And that was it. So on the next one, we talk about philosophy. All right.
I love it. Let's do it.
Ba-boom. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Lea. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leatarin.com, which is leahtharin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.